about alternatives to the monolingual facilitation of applied performance. And I am interested in work that somehow interweaves multiple linguistic varieties, and I conceptualize this as translingual praxis. Applied linguist Suresh Kanagaraja's response to monolingual facilitation is translingual praxis, a participant-led model for facilitating communicative practices. This is an alternative term to mono and multilingual practices, which tend to assume binaries of competence in whole languages, either one or many, and nothing really in between. The facilitation of translingual praxis, therefore, doesn't focus on the use of particular languages or their varieties, but instead on actors achieving intelligibility in whatever way they see fit. Thus, linguistic hybridity, such as code switching, defined by linguistic anthropologist Catherine Woolard as the use of any more than two varieties within one communicative practice, and as well as a wide spectrum of speaker competence levels and non-standard varieties, are welcome in translingual practice. I bring this concept together with interaction with sociolinguistics to analyze multiple frames in a lot of detail and discourse studies including applied performance praxis. I would like to discuss how translingual praxis can be facilitated by briefly analysing an example of a South African university context. South Africa is the focus of my larger PhD work because of the complexity of the language planning and policy that's happened over some 300 years of British and Dutch colonisation, as well as apartheid, of course. And importantly, how South Africans have responded to this language planning and policy through theatre and performance. Firstly, as a form of protest and during apartheid, and secondly, in their visualization of democracy, and more recently, in an effort to show the pluralities of the voices living in their everyday. So I'm going to focus on Misha de Wet, who is best fits into this latter category of trying to show the pluralities of voices every day. She makes works that prioritizes the actors' varieties rather than the audiences. And this is just a very short excerpt from video diaries, which we use as an evaluation strategy.
Expression. And in South Africa, where we have, you never know who's coming into your audience. I don't make work that favors, a certain type of audience that may come in. I think also because theatre culture in South Africa is so wishy-washy and very poorly supported. As a director, I've long ago decided that I will never make something for an audience because you don't know who your audience is ever going to be or if they're ever going to arrive. So I make work for the people that I'm making it with. And that's important to me.
Okay, so in prioritizing the actors, she's also in prioritizing their varieties over the intelligibility of the potential audience because she doesn't use any subtitles. So that's quite important in her work. So in her role as lecturer in a module called Live Performance at a university in South Africa called City Varsity, she wrote and directed and semi-devised a performance called Father My Father, a folk tale for the found girls. With the BA acting for camera students, third years, and the whole production I edited, I don't really have time to go into it, but it was mostly focusing on the absence of fathers in South African children's lives. De Wet's framing of translingual praxis began in the first rehearsal. So where to prioritise the actor's expression of linguistic variety, she wrote from City Varsities, as the institutions, English-only communicative practice, or you could also refer to it as a language policy. These are screenshots from the first rehearsal. I've blanked it out slightly just because of anonymity clauses for the participants, but not for De Wet. This is at a point in an interaction where she's requested from the actors whether it would be possible for them to translate their monologues, which she's just given to them, into their first languages, what she referred to as their first languages. And she said it was up to them how much they translated. It could be all or part of the monologue, depending on what's relevant for the character. So So in doing so, Devet framed a participation framework that aligned code switching and linguistic hybridity as appropriate for performance and theatre contexts. And this is the first time that any of the actors had been asked to call on their first varieties in any of the acting over the past few years, in both professional and the institutional world. So, what happened next was really in rehearsals between 2 and 4. The actors had each translated their monologues or parts of their monologues into their chosen mix of Setswana, Sesotho, isiZulu, isiXhosa, and Siswati, and Afrikaans. And Devet, who is an Afrikaans-English bilingual, facilitated one-on-one acting direct sessions during and following this period in a number of ways. For monologues in all varieties, she observed actors carefully and occasionally referred to an English script for intelligibility, and she never called on her second variety, Afrikaans, in any of the sessions, which I found interesting because she really chose not to privilege Afrikaans because of apartheid backgrounds of doing so. Devet avoided monolingual English-only facilitation, which is kind of quite an interesting thing which I want to point to, by supporting co-direction from peer actors who observed the process and could give feedback directly to the actors in the process without going through Devet as the central interlocutor. This created new opportunities for translingual praxis. So, sorry, but I'm going to just refer to this because it's a big part of what I'm doing. In rehearsal 7, referenced in figure 1 here, this gives a closer analysis of how translingual praxis emerged through these processes. The transcription that I'll draw on is in this very strange layout for you guys, but we'll get there. And in the first column, we've got the line number, which is really useful because you just refer to it in the analysis. And so then you've got talk, and this is a talk transcription down here, and then the movement transcription to the right. I'm having lots of lovely difficulties with sociolinguists trying to translate movement in a way that's not descriptive. Prior to this moment in this transcription, Devet facilitated a one-on-one directing session with a girl named Botsila, who is seen as B.O. in this transcription, who's delivering her monologue in Setswana in this direction session with Devet. And there's a bunch of peer actors sitting around the outside. This was then interrupted by Ontla Metze, who suggested to Botsila in Setswana that one of the words that she was delivering in her monologue was actually wrong, and she was trying to correct the translation. In response to this, Devet stands and waits for them to come to an agreement, stands back, and this particular transcription begins with Devet has waited for a little over 3 minutes for them to work it out for themselves. And another actor, Lorako, who's seen as L.O., who speaks Setswana also as a first language, there's 4 of them that speak Setswana as a first language, steps into the conversation to switch back to his South African English variety. At this point, where the arrow is just at the top, perhaps conceptualizing Lorako's, I'm lost. Lorako's switch to South African English variety as a signal for her to re-enter the interaction, Devet begins to make her presence felt again by firstly pacing away from the group, here, shakes her and walks away from them, and eventually returning, so she kind of listens, with the comment, guys, honestly, I've never felt so stupid in my life. Here. Before. Her embodied approach to the delivery of this line is neither as blunt nor finite as it reads, however. Rather, it's aligned with her rhetorical style of communication with the actors. Kanagaraja suggests that he connects rhetorical and social objectives with strategies of alignment, defined in ways in which actors match their linguistic resources they bring with people, situations, objects, and communicative ecology for meaning making. Devet's use of honestly, as well as her reference to the context of her entire life, are both rhetorical examples. Used as an alignment strategy to break up turn-taking between actors without necessarily driving the conversation in an entirely new direction in terms of content. She's therefore effectively heard, but maintains some passivity for the actors to then negotiate the translation for themselves. Then, this rapid response from Angela Metzer, where she says, so indexes, the actors are listening to that, but still driving towards translation for themselves. Direct embodied engagement denotes a strategy used to distance herself, to give the actors space to work and think. The actors can effectively interpret meaning from her communicative practices in this instance because of how it can be seen against her usual bold gesticulation and high volume facilitation approach. What can be seen in both this very brief overview of Devette's framing of the project, i.e. the translation request, and this very specific example, is that communicative practices in Father My Father can be conceptualized as translingual praxis, or can at least begin to be. These are marked by modes of hybridity as actors adopt non-standard varieties and code switch from both the performance processes and into the outcomes and then back again. And so in that way, the performance process is bleeding into the performance outcome, and the linguistic varieties that are being used aren't being kind of manipulated from the top down, so it's multilingual theatre. I see this kind of translingual praxis as useful for departures from the monolingual facilitation in applied performance praxis because of how it helps to engage the multilingual speakers of non-standard varieties that are so prevalent to the margins that this field operates in. And two, critically situates a homogenizing role of English. And three, provides new approaches to participant-led participation, even though obviously we're very sick of that term. Translingual praxis is also salient for work with minority languages due to the way that the varieties that have been oppressed by other institutional orders can then be challenged and shifted potentially in our work. This length of my presentation today makes it more of a provocation than a detailed space for analysis, but I'd like to extend a bit questions if possible, and I have an article that provides a bit more of a foundation for my thinking in Riot that should be by the end of the year published. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question with Alexander.
How did you hear about the director that you chose to do this case study on?
Lots of sitting in rehearsal rooms.
Yeah.
I spent quite a lot of time in South Africa then, and also beforehand, because I focused on South Africa in my master's as well, where I became interested. So yeah, I actually was really frustrated that I kept on finding models where directors or writers were passionate about using their first languages, but would not use them in the process at all. And so there was still this kind of language ideologies managing how they were using it here, but not here and then here, and I was so frustrated. Finally found her, so she's been a godsend.
Does she speak those languages at all?
She speaks Afrikaans only.
She doesn't speak. She speaks English?
Yeah. Yeah.
But not the other one.
No, and that's what I'm really interested in, because we're not ever going to speak all the languages in the room. So how do we then draw on them, which aren't ways of top-down kind of manipulation? It's an aesthetic choice.
One more minute. Thank you.
So that's great. Was she, the facilitator, was also performing in the show, or it was like a scripting of the rehearsal? Like
Scripting of
you
the
kind of transcribed the rehearsal process as a script.
Yeah, well, it's a transcription, yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's required of me, the social linguistics side, but it is really useful to add to detailed analysis. Yeah. But I also use screenshots a lot. There just wasn't really room here. So in the movement, I'll have a transcription of movement and then a screenshot, which is blurred, and I'll keep on going. That's kind of my new approach. My supervisors still have to do that, so
It feels like you're really walking the walk of some of the tough questions we're asking about how we communicate and something like this. So I really applaud you because that's hard work. That's really hard work. It's detailed, it's nitty gritty, but it's really stepping into that space of some of these bigger questions we've been asking through this week. So yeah.
I like the hard questions.
Did you ever have the experience when you were working with these people that their inner pictures, they appear with the language of the situation?
Inner pictures, what do you mean?
Like, you know, if you want to say something interesting, you know, the thought can be in English or can be in the other language?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. That happens in all the time.
Yes, I think that's maybe, I'm bilingual myself, so I understand, I think it's a wonderful way you're approaching that.
Yeah, that's the quotes which I was referring to, and having the freedom from the facilitation or whatever the institutional pressures, whatever's coming down with, which is
Yes.
setting the language policy, having the freedom to break that, and that's why she had to be quite clear in breaking it at the beginning, because it would be much easier if we could just go in and just speak how we wanted, obviously, being influenced. So she's kind of.
Further question.
Can we continue questions afterwards because we have to be very strict on time, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
They